Thank you, Chief Moran, for starting us off in a good way. About 2 weeks ago, I made him a commitment on behalf of Alberta's government. It was to support Indigenous-led research into undocumented deaths and burials of Indigenous children at the residential school sites. The announcement followed the discovery of the remains of the 215 children at a mass burial site at a former residential school in Kamloops, BC. I don't believe I'm overstating it when I say that Canadians and Albertans are deeply shaken by this horrifying revelation. In this country, we've skirted the truth, even though residential survivors and elders have been telling us for years that many children did not find their way home. Facing it is the start of reconciliation with our Indigenous people. In these disquieting days, we are learning why truth must precede reconciliation, and that is why we're here today. To support our Indigenous-led actions to examine, reveal, and honor the truth of children who died in these schools. Children who were forcibly taken from their families and who after decades and decades have still not made it home. There are families and communities who are looking to government for help. And we are here to help with the healing. I'm now going to invite Premier Jason Kenney to provide details of this new program. Premier Kenney.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you, Chief Moran, for opening us in a good way with those words of prayer, and thank you for welcoming us to traditional Treaty 6 territory and to the area of your Enoch First Nation. Thank you as well, Chief Aaron. I appreciate you being here, coming all the way up from Stoney territory, and to Stan Delorme, thank you for representing Métis settlement at Buffalo Lake for this important step forward about reconciliation and honoring the lives of young people who were separated from their families as a result of the brutally unjust Canadian policy of Indian residential schools. The discovery of 215 remains of students at the former Kamloops residential school has shaken our nation and called all of us to reflect on the wickedness of the Indian residential school system, which existed in this country for a century. Of the more than 100,000 young Aboriginal children who were taken away from their parents, stolen from their families by the state, and then often faced terrible living conditions, sometimes dangerous living conditions, and sometimes faced efforts by the authorities to literally beat their language and culture out of them. The horrendousness of that system is hard for us today to comprehend. And we have now been reminded that there have been many of those students who were buried in unmarked graves or graves that have been lost. And we've been reminded that we have a moral obligation to find them, to recover their memory, to honor those sites and their lives. This is primarily responsibility of First Nations communities, and we acknowledge, first of all, the very important work that has already been done before and since the publication of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. First Nations communities have gone back to many of these sites to honor the graves and to discover lost cemeteries. But much more of that work needs to be done. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission chapter on missing children and unmarked graves underscores the importance of this work being led by Indigenous people. Each of them will have their own approach about what is the best way, and we will honor that. Alberta's government wants to do its part to help First Nations do that critical work. And so today we are announcing the creation of an $8 million Alberta grant program to support First Nations in discovering and honoring lost grave sites of Indian residential school students across our province. While the residential school system was established by the federal government of Canada, we know that the province with the largest number of residential schools was Alberta. Many of those sites no longer exist. They've been, in a sense, lost to history. And yet we can conclude that all or most of those sites must have graves close to them. And so we will be providing these grants to First Nations and Métis communities who have proposals about how to research and identify these unmarked graves and cemeteries and how most appropriately to honor them. The Alberta Residential Schools Community Research Grant is open to Indigenous communities and groups, as I say, to lead research into undocumented residential school deaths and burials. These grants will go to Indigenous organizations who will decide how best to do the research. We understand that in some cases there are members of impacted communities who may not want to disturb these grave sites for spiritual reasons. Instead, they may want to erect a permanent commemoration, or some may want to do full archaeological research that would require cooperation with technical experts and advanced scientific equipment. Whatever the choices they make, we will be there to support them with this $8 million fund, which will also be available for research, including gathering oral histories and the knowledge of elders, engagement to determine how communities wish to proceed with a burial site, use of ground-penetrating radar and other technologies to explore potential unmarked burial sites, partnering with experts experienced in locating human burials, and maintenance and commemorative work such as installation or restoration of grave markers, placement of memorials, or commemoration events. Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission made a number of recommendations which Alberta's government is taking action on, and I want to thank Minister Wilson for working with colleagues on doing so. One of those recommendations one of those calls to action, number 71, was for provinces and their chief coroners to work with the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation on identifying any archival records of where students lived, and especially where they may have died at residential school sites in their provinces. Unfortunately, our archival records from that long period are limited, and in some cases, very little remains. But Alberta's government is leaving no stone unturned to dig through all of our archival records to find whatever we can to make that available to the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation and to any local First Nations that may be interested. So, and we are eager to work as well with Government of Canada, whose primary legal responsibility this is, as well as with First Nations, to do everything we can to reclaim lost burial sites. It is true that many of these children passed away from diseases that were then common at that time, but it's also true that the death rate for children at residential schools was far, far higher than for children in the general population, a reflection of the substandard and often dangerous living conditions that they were forced to experience. The trauma has, for many families, become intergenerational, and we hope that this action will be one small evidence of the desire of Albertans to pursue the path of reconciliation and to honor those children whose lives were lost.
Thank you, Premier, for your words in support of this program. I know a lot of people have been carrying around a lot of sorrow here. And this new program, it's not going to change the past, but it can help build a better future. And we have a web page live now for eligible communities and organizations to get the details and to put in their applications. So I strongly encourage the communities to work together where they can on applications for the sites where they lost family members. But any eligible community can apply for their own work at the site, and they can qualify for up to $150,000 in grant funding for the type of work that Premier Kenney just spoke about. Along with federal grants, the successful applicants could end up getting funding for most of their costs, and maybe help to get along weighted answers before too much more time passes. So right now I'd like to turn it back to Chief Billy Morin of Enoch to speak about the importance of taking this action.
Tamskatinawa Gakyaw na Wakumaganak, Minister Rick, Premier Kenney, Nistis, Ogamau, Aaron, Stan, Chairman Métis, Buffalo Lake. I was at our culture camp, Muskegee Culture Camp, that's Enoch Cree Nation, this morning, and I was sitting in ceremony praying for this announcement that I get to be a part of. And in that ceremony, there were 3 boys, probably 7, 8 years old. And I watched them. I watched them in that ceremony. And you can tell one of them has never been in that ceremony before. And I just had to say how proud I was. I had to speak in that ceremony, and I had to say how proud I was of them being there and how fortunate they were to be there. How this space wasn't created for a long time for them. And I was watching them, and the boy who has never even been in that ceremony, he gave up his seat for somebody next to him who was a little bit older. He was sitting on a cushion. He said, "Oh, take my cushion." And just watching those boys in ceremony and how inherently their respect and Nehiel Pamatsu and Nehiel worldview spirit lives in them. And how I told them I didn't get to grow up like this. This opportunity wasn't afforded to me like how it is today. And it certainly wasn't afforded to their ancestors who went to residential school. And so it's a good day today. I don't think things are coincidence all the time. Those young boys in that ceremony gave me a lot of hope. And today the announcement from our friends at the province gave me a lot of hope too. I'm 34, and what I always say when I talk about residential schools, I never went to residential school. My mom and dad never went to residential school. But when the 215 came out, 12 o'clock at night, Nohkam Chapan, who's 81, called me at 12 o'clock at night, and she never calls me. And she just needed to talk. And it was a good talk, but she said she needed to talk to someone, and she called me. I told her I'm just very, very fortunate that you were a cycle breaker. Your son was a cycle breaker, and I'll just continue the work to be the best cycle breaker of abuse and the wrongfulness that was done to you and all of our relations. With this announcement today, that story never ends. It keeps going. And those open wounds are very much open at this time with Kamloops and things that are going around the country right now. And we can forget about our differences at times like these, and whether you're a representative of the provincial crown, or you're an Edmontonian, or you're a government bureaucrat, or you're from the Métis settlement, or you're a chief from Treaty 6 or 7 or 8, or you're a survivor, We're still all treaty people. We all come together to do those young people. So for the 8 million today, it's not about the number, but you can't help but sometimes it's not about the number, but compare it to, some other announcements that have been made. It's a great start. I got to say that on behalf of the province. It's a great start when you compare it to the federal government announcement. It's a great start for this place, and the Premier spoke about it. This is where the most residential schools were provincially. And so that's a great start. That's a great action. That's a great reconciliation. Behind me is the U of A, and they've reached out already and told me that we would like to help you, the Prairie Institute of Indigenous Archaeology and Technology. We just want to help. Kisha Supernote has already done great work for us at Enoch Cree Nation. And so some of this work, depending on which community you're from, is going to be really technical, and there's going to be a lot of capacity, if so choosing by the elders and their survivors in those communities if they want to do that type of work. But I'm also thankful for the province to make it so flexible that, maybe it's not hard, heavy archaeological work. Maybe it's more about creating that permanent story in a monument. And so I'm just thankful the province allowed for that. They gave the decision-making capacity back to the nations and the settlements themselves. It's a good move. And it's sunny today. When Minister Rick, my friend, was speaking, the sun came out. He's a good guy. He works hard to build relationships, and it's a tough road still, but he's a good guy and he does right by us, and I'm just thankful for all the work and his staff did for this. And hi kinanaskumtanawa.
Chief Young, would you like to come forward?
Hamba asteno nga hamba nin chikta wakane shnie singe gija hewan no amba inkunde ngina chan anja nimi gisnimi dangi nomi to ada neko inkuch nge gija ke nga hamba ne heche do hongi wan no nchi nai jin jen kichunze honga toshi honga ko bae ngi chia bijun to ada biktine bae da no habitok engechimi ambane ngina be hewan no chen chengia bi ni ngina be hewan chen nga ambane chiwa hinde mission shnie shepeno negichima honga beli mai stand ne kunchi bai buan no jan premier jan nango Minister Wilson ko nja bai ne chingi chobijon ne da che ne hiubne te hewan no hecha also dan pan chingi chumchia Today, as I stand here before you, I think about the opportunities that have been given to us, the opportunity to come together. We're here in Treaty 6 territory, and I acknowledge my fellow Chief, Billy Morin, for welcoming us to come together, and by opening our session with a prayer. There are First Nation rights, there are First Nations teachings that we have kept for many years. Each day when the time comes, when the sunlight comes, we are reminded that the day brings us opportunity. The day brings us renewal. The day brings us strength. The same teachings that were given to the children of back when we were first in camps and so forth with tribes and so forth. That teaching still continues. And as we all know, First Nations, we greet life and at a holistic approach. We bring Mother Earth, the skies, our animals together to appreciate. We give life to our children. We give hope to our children. And at the same time, we are reminded that we've come through a long history, a history where sometimes the chapters are darkened, but yet the next page is always there. And as Chief Morin mentioned, the holistic approach with Mother Earth and so forth. As Minister Wilson and Premier stood up here, as you have probably noticed, It's cloudy, but all of a sudden the sun shined, shone on them. We're reminded that on a cloudy day, thunder, whatever, just like life, we'll have challenges. But yet, don't forget, the sun is always there, shining upon us. That sun today comes in the message that our counterpart, the government of Alberta, through the leadership of Premier Kenney, that's the reason why we're here today. He has made an announcement for the families, for the nations, when it comes to residential school. I myself, I represent G4 chiefs down south in Treaty 7 territory, consisting of the Stonies and the Sotana. Of course, we've had some residential schools on site where we have visited, where we have heard some stories time and time again. And of course, those memories are still strong. And intergenerational families, I'm one of them. And I was in day school too myself. The treatment that we received during that time, we thought that was a normal. And then we practiced those as we raised our children too. But unfortunately, the sad result is our children did experience what our ancestors experienced as well. There's a lot of healing that needs to be done. There's a lot of reconciliation that needs to take place. But as mentioned again too, this is what we consider as reconciliation. And as I go back, I will take this news back to our people to say that our friends, our government, under Premier Kenney, has stepped forward to help one another as we heal. Of course, there's still hurt. There's still lots of memories. Our kids, for the next generation to come, will certainly acknowledge the contribution and the partnership that we have amongst governments to come together and to work together for a brighter future. As I say that, as I can see, the sun is shining again. There is hope. There is a brighter tomorrow for all of us, First Nations and the governments and all our people of Alberta that make a greater Canada. Of course, like I said, we have lots of memories, but yet there's a better tomorrow. And with that, I'd like to thank the Premier, Jason Kenney, Minister Rick Wilson, and your staff for making this happen. Of course, the money that we will be taking, we will be using it accordingly to honor the people that took part in the residential school, the ones that did not make it home, the ones that brought the memories home with them. But yet, we will give this opportunity for them to help them in their healing, to help our communities in our healing. And the way we will do it will be determined by the meetings that we will be having with our elders, with our leadership, with our people, especially our young people, to see what we want. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, and thank you for the prayer, Chief. And again, thank you for this opportunity. May God be with you, and the Creator guide you home when you get back to your home fires. With that, thank you very much. Yes.
Ishnish, thank you so much for the kind words. Now Stan from Buffalo Lake, would you like to come forward?
Lucky you have the sanitizer here, Minister. I was going to spit on my hands and get on with the show. Good afternoon, or is it good morning yet? But anyhow, it's a beautiful day out here, and glad to be here today. First of all, I'll start out in my native language, which is the Cree language. Basically, welcoming the dignitaries and speaking to the folks back home. Hamagan do temte kan me tenu mu tanots nista. Pe we chi ho anoma kam skuta me homa. Tan soma kes was ko ito me homa. Awas sako ka gi pek mai chek. Ka gi pe ot ni chekot ka asot ot ka itaman residential schools are good. Ka gi do ayachek. Ego atet mooi ki pe gi ok. Atet okti kim sonat sok. Ki punt mat sok michet. Ego megwats mina ogamna eto skata me hom megwats. Ego ge ki choge ma ko geiton megwatsoma. Sonia om megwats. We megyo akoma. Nando ke sapecha ho Sonia. Ki goma ekusisoma ki we oga ka gi punt mat se chekoge. Oskayak. Nando ke tutama chekego. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Chief Young, Chief Moran, thank you for the prayer there, Chief Moran, Premier, the Minister. There's been a lot that's been said already by the two chiefs, very eloquently, obviously, and talking about the not just the cultural part of things, but as well as the the funding that's been announced by the Premier and the Minister, and it's definitely funding that that will be needed to do the work that rightfully should be done with the residential school victims and those communities that really can't afford, maybe within their budgets, really can't afford to finance those kind of projects. So I'm pleased to hear that announcement. And talking about the residential schools, I for one is not a victim, as such I'll say, but there's others within our settlement that have that have fell victims, I'll say, and and still the scars from if I can use that word, from the residential schools are there for some of the for some of the folks, and and I think they'll always be there. But if we can do something to comfort and assist them with with what they're paying to a certain degree, I think will be of a big help. And I'll go back to what I said. I'm not a residential school victim, but I do represent some of our members that that are. And I remember growing up as a kid, I didn't realize residential schools were even around us. I remember my mom, whenever we'd be bad or done something that she didn't appreciate, she threatened to send me to reform schools, what she called it. So nowadays I understand those are residential schools that she talked about back then. So, but I mean, these are some of the things that that kids were threatened with as well. And now that I look back, it's obviously it wasn't a good threat. But I too welcome the the funding that's that's been announced here today, and the Premier talked about $8 million, and no disrespect to my First Nation brothers here, but there's 8 Métis settlements, and I thought, well, that's good of the Premier offering the Métis settlements $1 million each. No. But however, before I leave here, I will say that I'm not here to represent the Métis Settlement General Council. Okay, I'll put that out there. I'm here to represent the Buffalo Lake Métis Settlement as a chairman and a spokesman of that community alone. With that, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks so much, everyone. That concludes the formal portion of today's announcement, and we'll now move into a media Q&A. Just because I only see a couple of folks here live today, I'm going to just go to the phones first, and we'll finish with you two live here today. So with that, operator, can you please put through our first caller?
Carrie Tate, Globe and Mail.
And thank you for taking my question. My question is for the Premier and the Minister. I'm wondering right now, as there's news coming out, particularly out of Kamloops, what the province is doing to support Indigenous peoples who might be experiencing trauma right now.
Well, I think today's action is a very clear example of responding to the implications of the Kamloops discovery. Obviously, the federal government has the primary relationship with First Nations communities through the treaties, and what the province does is to provide services, particularly for status First Nations people who live off reserve, and we are trying to close service gaps where it might be, for example, mental health services and other health services. We don't want people falling between the gaps between the federally supported on-reserve system that exists and the provincial system off-reserve. That's an ongoing but important bit of work. As you know, Alberta has, one of the key initiatives of our government is significantly expanding mental health and addiction support. And we do know that Indigenous people disproportionately have suffered from the negative consequences of addictions. We've seen that in our data over the past year with the spike in opioid overdoses in the first half of last year was felt disproportionately amongst young Indigenous men. So we are responding with, through the efforts of the Associate Minister for Addictions and Mental Health, Jason Lewan, to provide a specialized program support. I was with Chief Morin last year, or pre-COVID, to announce an increase in the number of treatment beds, for example, at the Poundmaker Lodge near Edmonton. We are building a residential, long-term, full recovery and treatment center at the Kainai Blood Nation near Lethbridge in southern Alberta, and working with a number of other First Nations communities to improve access to addictions and mental health support. So those are some of the points I would make. Minister Wilson, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Premier. The Premier covered it pretty good. One I can add is we do a lot of work. I've set up a panel for the missing murdered Indigenous women and girls, and a lot of that is from transgenerational trauma that's carried on. And that's a tough one. There's a lot of trauma that's been triggered because of this. It's brought back memories, and so the panel has been working really hard on that, and we hope to be coming out with a final report here this fall. But there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes that people don't see, and a lot of people with big hearts that are putting this stuff together. And I just really want to thank our staff. They talk government moves slow. Well, I'll tell you, we moved fast on this one, and I really have to thank my Deputy Minister, who's worked really close with the Federal Crown Minister as well to get this done. So thank you for that.
And Carrie, did you have a follow-up at all?
Yeah, I'm curious, how long do you think this the $8 million grant program will run for?
Thank you. So the applications, you can go online right now today and start the application process. We want to roll this out as quick as we can. I've been hearing from a lot of First Nations that they're ready to move forward with this. They want to start the healing process. And so it's ongoing right now. Our deadline is next January, but the funding will keep rolling out beyond that as well. So that is the deadline, though, for the applications. So I encourage the communities to get their applications in quick. It'll be an ongoing process. It's not if you apply for $10,000, it's up to $150K. So, it's going to depend on what type of things they want to have happen in their communities. I talked to one of the chiefs this morning. He said he didn't want to dishonor the sacred grounds, and so they don't want to do the ground penetrating radar. So you're going to see different programs for different communities as to how they want to handle the funding. But the funding is there for them, and it's starting today.
Thank you, Minister Wilson. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Rick Bell, Calgary Sun.
Good morning. Premier, first of all, I respect the great importance of the announcement made today by your government and with the other leaders there. With your indulgence, I'd like to ask you a question on another topic, if I
Go ahead, Rick.
if I could.
Yep, go ahead.
Is that possible?
Go ahead.
Okay. What as we get closer to July 1st and the opening up for summer across the province, almost all the municipalities have embraced it in their own way, and a lot of them have done that by basically going along with your plan, going in lockstep with your plan. And one part of the plan is that the removal of their mask bylaws or the deactivating of those mask bylaws to be in accord with your plan. One exception is the city of Calgary, who will talk about it some more in July, but we actually have no date set. It could be as late July. What is your reaction to them not going along with your plan? And in fact, being quite critical of it in debate when they debated it earlier this week.
Well, I think it's unfortunate. Our government has tried to work closely with municipalities to keep our approach to COVID consistent across the province. I've conveyed that repeatedly to Mayor Nenshi. I don't think it's helpful for different governments to adopt different and conflicting policies. I think that can only lead to confusion in the general public, when what we need instead is clarity. The province has offered that clarity with a reopening plan that is based on the expert advice of our Chief Medical Officer for Health and her expert team, based on a careful analysis of the data here and across the world. As Dr. Hinshaw underscored yesterday, she is confident in the plan that she developed based on the high and growing levels of vaccination, population protection, and the continuing decline in COVID numbers that we are seeing across our province. As she said yesterday, there is no known variant which she sees as posing a risk for significant increases in severe outcomes, including hospitalizations. I would point out, Rick, that Calgary is actually well ahead of the provincial average on vaccination. We now have 76% of eligible Calgarians have received at least a first dose. I believe that by Canada Day, by Freedom Day, in our Open for Summer plan, that we'll be at close to 40% fully vaccinated, which is a higher level of population protection. The mayor told me at one point he didn't want people in the New York Times seeing Albertans at the Calgary Stampede without masks. Well, guess what? Governor Cuomo just lifted the statewide mask mandate in New York based on a 70% first dose metric, which is the same metric that we've had in Alberta for the Chief Medical Officer's Open for Summer plan. So all I can tell you is the government of Alberta is following the expert advice of our Chief Medical Officer instead of following angry voices on Twitter. And I would encourage every municipality to respect the expert advice that we are receiving and to not confuse the public, but rather maintain consistency between the provincial and municipal governments. I think that's the best way forward.
And Rick, do you have a follow-up at all?
Does it frustrate you when, as I say, the vast majority of local governments are on board? It appears that many Albertans are welcoming what July 1st, Canada Day, will bring. And I've received that myself in a lot of emails from readers. Does it bother you when people are still talking about doomsday scenarios, are talking about fourth waves being imminent? We had a councillor in Edmonton talk about how if your plan went through within, I believe he said 4 to 6 weeks, maybe it was 6 to 8 weeks, we'd be right back in the thick of things in the bad way. I mean, how do you feel after all of this? We've got 57 cases, all the numbers you've mentioned, all the vaccination numbers, that there still is a sizable body of people, including politicians, who continue to naysay and doomsday the opening plan.
Before I answer that, I just want are the chiefs who are here okay with me answering these off-topic questions? Are you okay with that? I don't, because our protocol is to take whatever questions come. So I just wanted to check in with them. Rick, first of all, let me just say this about masks. As Dr. Hinshaw said yesterday, people are welcome to continue to wear masks if they choose to do so. And there may be some people who have good reasons for that with an elevated risk profile. As she said, maybe people with asthma or people who can't take a vaccine or folks who maybe are immunocompromised. It's absolutely their choice, and we should honor that choice. If people, I don't think there should be, we should not get into judging people as we move forward into openness. But I do note that there has been a tendency amongst some, including some of your media colleagues, to just constantly beat the drum of fear. And I really think that is not where the public's at. It's certainly not where the science is at. I think it's counterproductive. We have told Albertans, if you do the right thing, step up and get the jab, that's our way to regain our freedoms and get our lives back to normal. And yet we still seem to have a small number of folks who say we can virtually never get back to normal. And I think that's extremely unhelpful. We have to, as Dr. Hinshaw has said, we have to take into account all of the different factors, including the damaging impact that public health restrictions have on our broader society, on our broader social health. And we have done exactly that by accepting her advice in the opening plan. And I'll just drill down on this a little deeper. People some are raising, I think, hysterical concerns about a particular variant, which, according to the Public Health England report, 94% of people who get a first dose of a mRNA vaccine like Pfizer are protected from hospitalization. 96% are protected from hospitalization on the second dose from the so-called Delta or B.1.612.2 Indian variant. That is the science. Let's follow the science. We are headed, I think, towards at least 75% population protection on first dose coverage. We are going to be very quickly catching up to that on full immunization. The science of vaccines demonstrates their powerful protective effect. I understand people having some anxiety, and we all have to continue to be mindful of potential future variants. But the reality is that other jurisdictions around the world have opened up much more broadly, much more quickly, and have continued to see COVID numbers decline. If it could happen elsewhere in the world, why can't it happen here in Alberta, particularly with the seasonal tailwinds of summer behind us? So I think we need to take yes for an answer. We need to say yes to the powerful protection of vaccines. That's what our plan is predicated on. If people want to take greater precaution in their own lives, I encourage them to do that. That's the great thing about freedom. They're free to do so.
Thank you, Premier. Operator, can you please put through our next question?
Bill for Chairs, TTV.
Hi. Yeah, this is a question for Chief Morin and or any of the other chiefs or First Nations representatives who are there. I understand, and I hope this is a fair question, because I understand that no amount of money is ever enough. But the grants here are $150,000. When it comes to, the money it's going to take to research the grounds of former residential schools, especially considering some of them were moved over the years, the cost of ground-penetrating radar, potential archaeological efforts, identification, proper commemoration. I'm wondering if that's just a start. How much do you really need? And I also understand that money could be coming from multiple levels of government, but I guess, to Chief Morin and others, do you need more from all levels of government, and how much more do you need?
It's too early to say if we need more and how concrete that is, but I would say that this is a significant start and all that. So you're very, very right. And I think, again, I just refer back to the flexibility of the program. So some don't want to do ground penetrating radar, and some probably do. So, you know, and there's a lot of technical capacity when it comes to ground penetrating radar. We spoke a little bit earlier about archaeological work, which is not necessarily tech work. It's a lot of going through archives and getting that type of capacity going. And so again, I referred back the backdrop behind us, which is the U of A, and we have a great relationship with the Prairie Institute of Archaeology, Indigenous Archaeology, and we're going to rely upon them to help us out. They already are helping us out, and you know, Enoch's lucky as a First Nation to have that contact. We're lucky to be a part of the U of A with those types of partnerships. And you know, I was just having a discussion in the background here with one of our techs. Is, you know, some of these schools are not actually on the First Nations themselves, so we look forward to the opportunity to group and pool funding to do what's right as communities. So it's not an easy black and white answer. This is a great start, though, and we'll probably end up pooling it up with federal funds that have been announced, but not specifically for the province of Alberta.
Thank you, Chief Morin. Was there another chief here who wanted to add any comments to that before I ask Bill for a follow-up? All right, just hold on one moment, Bill.
Thank you, Chief Young here again. First of all, again, my appreciation for the announcement in particular to start this process of our healing. And of course, like I said in my earlier comments and speeches, that we'll certainly go back to our communities and do consultation amongst our elders and our leadership to determine what avenue and what direction we'll be taking. Of course, in respect to what took place back then, of course, that contribution will be respected as well too. So with that, this 150 per is acceptable. But one thing that I have strongly made comments on in regards to anything to do with residential school is I believe in some cases that there are limitations and set times to go after some fundings and so forth. But this one is the start of it, and then we will certainly use it. But these other made mention funding available out there is that these limitations, there's a set time for it, and there shouldn't be no set time for it when it comes to residential school, because of the fact that there are times where we were told we didn't, of course, we were told that the timeline is gone, you're not eligible, and so forth. So that is certainly unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. But on this one, this is the first day of it, and then it'll be up to each community to move forward. Of course, with departments coming together and working together, federal and provincial, we'll certainly pool those together and moving forward with that too. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bill. And I believe Chairman Delorme also would like to add some comments.
Thank you very much. Very good question, obviously. The monetary part of it, I do believe, is obviously something that comes to mind. And the money that's been announced today, the funding that's been announced, I should say, today, would most likely be the start of something that we need to do to reveal the truth, as well as give us a start, not necessarily a head start, but at least some funding so that we can do some of the administrative and some of the technical work. Obviously, the other work that to most likely explore and and identify what we're talking about or looking at as far as any kind of monetary value is concerned. But there's never no real hard costs, I'll say, knowing when you're dealing with the unknown. I think for us anyway, we definitely, like I said, welcome the funding to get us started and work from there and see where we're at, see where the funding takes us and what it is that we can afford to do for our community. And like one of the chiefs talked about, the residential schools themselves are not necessarily within the community, but we have Métis communities and First Nation communities surrounding us where I come from, and within a few miles, there's either a convent or a residential school that most people that have that have attended those things are are still there. So I mean, there's work to be done, but as far as the monetary part of it is concerned, we'll know once we get going on this project. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bill, did you have a follow-up at all?
Quick follow-up for the Premier, if I could, following up on a previous question. Basically, Friday, when you announced the sort of reopening plan for Canada today, we were at 70.2% first dose vaccination. So far today, it hasn't updated yet, we're at 70.8. So that first dose vaccination rate is really just creeping up. It's nearly plateaued. And I'm just wondering, is that good enough, or are you concerned that we might be plateauing well under that 75 to 85% range that many medical experts would like to see?
Well, the medical expert whose opinion I follow most closely is Alberta's Chief Medical Officer for Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw. She and her team came to Alberta's cabinet with the recommendation of a 70% first dose coverage amongst the eligible population as the key metric for reopening. Underlying that are a lot of other numbers, including natural protection from prior infection, and the second dose number, which continues to grow, I believe will be very close to 40% of the eligible population fully immunized by Canada Day. We're leading Canada in that respect. So we're well ahead of other countries that have, and other jurisdictions that have fully reopened at our current levels of protection. And most importantly, the most vulnerable people have been overwhelmingly vaccinated. So we're at about 87% of people over the age of 70 who have received at least one dose. And we'll be closing in on, I'm pretty sure in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be getting close to all of those seniors and elderly people with chronic conditions who want a vaccine having been fully vaccinated. So I think we're really in a good position, but sure, I would love to see the number keep growing. I think it will move forward in inches instead of miles at this point. Most people super enthusiastic about getting the jab have already done it. We figure there's about another roughly 15% of the population that wants to get vaccinated or is open to it, but they're just kind of latecomers on this, and they haven't gotten around to it. It's just not a top priority. We have to constantly make it more and more convenient for them, which we're doing with walk-in clinics and drive-through clinics, and we're doing it at temples and mosques and workplaces, and we're working on pushing it out harder in rural areas to make it easier for people to get. So we're doing our part with adequate supply now, which we appreciate from the federal government. We're doing our part to make it more convenient. And as you know, we did see with the lottery after it was announced a couple of weeks ago, we went from a decline in first dose demand to an increase. So that probably did add, 2 or 3 points of percentage points of people getting the vaccine. And we'll just keep working away at it. I think you'll see it gradually move up, slowly, but move up towards, I'm hoping 75%. And I'd like to go beyond that. But at the end of the day, we're not going to force people to get vaccinated. It's their choice, and we want to do everything we can to facilitate a choice that will protect them.
All right. Thanks very much. Now, we are running up against a bit of a clock here, so we only have time for one more question today, and I'm going to take that from the ground here.
Hey, it's Janet French from the CBC. Since Premier's standing there, I'll start with you. Earlier this week, I was talking to members of the Piikani First Nation to comment on a report just released by your government about opioid poisoning deaths and how that's disproportionately affecting First Nations people. I am curious. They called for sort of immediate responses to this kind of thing, like harm reduction responses, such as increasing the number of supervised consumption sites, making safe supply of drugs available, more nasal naloxone outside of the Edmonton pilot. Which, if any of these kinds of steps, would you be willing to take, given that there is a feeling that this trauma that came up in Kamloops may spark more opioid use to sort of dull the pain?
Well, I did address the disproportionately high level of addictions amongst young Indigenous people in Alberta in response to an earlier question. I talked about many of the actions that we've been taking in partnership with First Nations to address that together. I was just speaking to Pekani Chief Stanley Greer the other day, and he was very complimentary of our government's partnership with his First Nation on a number of issues. He did not raise this with me. I have certainly spoken to a number of First Nations leaders who actually are strongly opposed to the idea of providing free illegal drugs to people that would further facilitate their addiction. What we're hearing from First Nations is a very keen support for our continuum of care approach, which ranges from responsible harm reduction to lifetime recovery support. And that, for example, is manifest by our commitment to build the new residential treatment facility at the Kenney Blackfoot First Nation near Lethbridge. We're also going to be building another center proximate to that in Lethbridge County. And so we'll continue to, Minister Lawan will continue to work with First Nations in Alberta to address the unique prevalence of addiction challenges, particularly amongst younger Indigenous men in Alberta. But we don't believe, and I have not met First Nations leaders who believe the solution is to basically recreate a bunch of downtown East Side Vancouvers, which has, of course, been a humanitarian medical catastrophe. So flooding the market with government-provided illegal drugs is not something that Alberta will be doing.
Okay, thank you, Premier. And Janet, do you have a quick follow-up to wrap things up today?
Just for any of the chiefs or the chair of the Métis Council, I'm curious if you could offer us any specifics. Like, if you are in fact applying for this grant, is there a particular site that you feel people in your community really are urgently want to explore or investigate?
Yeah, there's a high level tie with what the Premier was just speaking about. So other investments they've made are into the Palmakers Lodge, and Palmakers is the Edmonton site, primarily for First Nations residential schools. And so I know there are stories, and I know there is a wanting to search that site. So we'll be approaching Palmaker to have those initial discussions. With the grant itself, I did speak earlier towards, and I love the flexibility of the grant. Because they put it back in the hands of the nation. So what I would really love to see, if nations so choose, is to build capacity with GPR and archaeology. And so there's great partnerships out there through the U of A, as I spoke earlier. And again, those will take time and consultation for the First Nations to do with their elders and their survivors. But there's so much opportunity here to do a bunch of things. Even in job creation, technical capacity, monument capacity, and just sharing circles. So, I think locally for Enoch, the primary location would be that site.
And Chief Young or Chairman DeLorme, did you have any comments to offer?
Thank you very much for the question. When we look at the atrocities that have happened throughout the province and the nation, for that matter, as far as residential schools is concerned, especially up in the North Country, I'm not quite too familiar with the South Country like I am with the North, but where we're at, we're near Lac La Biche, near Blue Quills, and we've had families move from those areas into our communities. So we probably, I shouldn't say probably, we'll most likely get touch base with those families and formulate a team effort to explore and obviously do some research on some of the some of those grounds. Just recently, though, there was a vigil at the Lac La Biche Mission, for example, where some of the provincial representatives attended as well, and the folks from that area basically mentioned the school that was there was a convent and slash residential school to a certain degree. So those are the kind of things that we probably be looking at as a community, and and take it from there, and who knows, maybe lead to other areas as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chief Young, did you have comments?
Thank you. As I've stated in my, first of all, good question. In regards to how we're going to be going forward is, like I said, we'll certainly call our elders, and then any circumstance or any event, we certainly come together with a ceremony in itself, and through that ceremony setting, we will certainly determine what direction will be taken and what capacity each area will or department will be taken and so forth, and we'll be moving forward. Of course, in Morley in itself, there's 3 tribes: Chiniki, Wesley, and Bearspaw, and of course, we will certainly call upon our elders to converse and determine what direction we'll be taking. But it'll be led by, first of all and foremost, we'll lead it with a ceremony for sure, and that'll guide us. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, everyone. That concludes today's event. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and a special thank you to Chief Young, Chief Morin, and Chairman DeLorme.